You're standing in a Victorian torture museum, London 1888. The Iron Maiden gleams under gaslight spikes lining its interior, hinged door standing open like a metal jaw. The placard reads, Medieval German Execution Device, 1515, Nuremberg. The tour guide explains how condemned prisoners were sealed inside, spikes piercing vital organs, death coming slowly over hours. 50 tourists lean closer, horrified and fascinated. One woman faints. The museum owner tallies another successful day, admission fees, souvenir sales, the moral satisfaction of showing how barbaric the past was compared to enlightened Victorian Britain. There's just one problem. This device was built approximately 3 months ago in a Birmingham workshop, specifically for this museum. The medieval torture device you're seeing is Victorian horror theater cosplaying as historical fact. Welcome to the greatest con in torture history, the wholesale invention of medieval brutality by 19th century entrepreneurs who understood that nothing sells quite like moral superiority disguised as education. Today, we're examining 20 torture devices, 10 complete fabrications, and 10 documented realities, and teaching you systematic source criticism so you can distinguish historical fact from profitable fiction. This matters for medieval survival skills, because understanding how torture narratives get manufactured reveals patterns about how power structures use false histories to justify present systems. The Victorians needed medieval barbarity to validate their civilization. Modern systems employ similar tactics. Learning to spot the con protects you from both historical manipulation and contemporary propaganda dressed as fact. Let's start with the myths, beginning with the crown jewel of Victorian torture fabrication, the Iron Maiden. The popular story? Nuremberg, 1515. Coin forger, executed by being sealed in spiked coffin. The reality? No firm proof shows Iron Maidens used before 1700s, 1800s. Real medieval punishment systems leave paper trails, court orders, tool inventories, payment receipts, repair records. Here, the paperwork stays silent while the showpiece gets louder. Why? Because Victorian audiences wanted moral contrast. Look how savage they were. Look how advanced we are. Museums and traveling shows fed that hunger. Replicas spread through tourist cities until repetition started acting like evidence. Atlas Obscura documents displays packed with devices whose labels admit they became popular long after medieval era, even while lighting and sound effects sell unified Dark Age narrative. The survival lesson. When examining historical claims, demand primary source documentation, court records, legal inventories, contemporary accounts. If the best evidence is museum displays and it sounds medieval, you're looking at probable fabrication. This principle applies beyond torture devices. Anytime someone claims this is how they did it in the past, ask for the receipts. Literal receipts. Because systematic violence leaves systematic documentation. The Iron Maiden's absence from medieval records is itself evidence that it's Victorian invention serving Victorian purposes. Myth #2. The Chastity Belt. Pop culture treats these as normal medieval household gear knights riding to war, locking metal on wives. The reality, Smithsonian explains this as myth, growing over time, pointing to satirical Renaissance art and later centuries retelling jokes as if describing real daily life. Even British Museum catalog tags allege chastity belt as forgery, noting how weak Renaissance evidence is, leaning on burlesque and anecdote instead of proof of widespread use. The survival lesson. Control narratives sell instantly because they confirm what people already want to believe about power dynamics. When historical claims perfectly match contemporary anxieties in this case, male control of female sexuality treat them with extra skepticism. The smoothness of the narrative is warning sign, not validation. Myth #3. Pair of anguish. This device carries medieval reputation, yet History.com notes scholars question whether these really come from Middle Ages, highlighting crucial detail. Surviving examples include coiled springs, feature fitting better with later early modern metalwork than medieval cutoff around 1450. Atlas Obscura describes torture museums, where Pear appears beside other items with dubious origins, labels barely specifying when or where anything happened. The survival lesson. Technological anachronisms expose fabrications. Coiled springs in medieval devices are like finding zippers on ancient Roman tunics. When you spot tech that doesn't match claimed period, you've found either later manufacture or outright fake. This teaches broader principle. Always check if the components match the timeline. Myth hash 4. Judas Cradle. Atlas Obscura describes exhibitions where artifacts sit in confused mix with lurid names. Labels dodging basics like time and place or admitting objects became popular centuries after medieval era. Visitors leave thinking they saw medieval history when they saw Victorian fascination sold as medieval certainty. A professor explains many supposedly ancient ironwork items found in near-identical copies across tourist spots were made centuries later, satisfying Victorian hunger for gore tales. The survival lesson. Provenance matters more than plausibility. When device has no clear chain of custody, no period records, and thrives primarily in copy-paste museum rooms, treat story as unproven regardless of how convincing it sounds. Chain of evidence beats emotional impact. Myth hash 5. Heretics fork. Sounds exact. Forked collar forcing posture, but exact stories can drift without sources. Many museum lists present it confidently, but rarely tie to court records or dated inventories, placing it in clear region and decade. Real legal systems leave paperwork when tools get ordered, stored, repaired, described. The survival lesson. Simple devices feel believable, so people accept them faster than messy truth. If best evidence comes from modern display culture instead of period documents, call it unverified even if convincing. Plausibility is warning sign, not green light. This inverts normal logic. The more obviously medieval something seems, the more skeptical you should be. Myth hash 6. Pit and Pendulum Machine. Edgar Allan Poe published The Pit and the Pendulum in 1842. The pendulum torture became sticky image tied to Spanish Inquisition. The catch? Story is fiction. Wikipedia tracks pendulum idea to single secondhand 1,826 account by Juan Antonio Llorente, with modern sources treating pendulum method as fantasy or misunderstanding. One loud image drowns messy records. People remember Blade, forget archive. The survival lesson. Fiction shapes historical memory more powerfully than documentation. When torture device appears first in literary sources rather than legal records, you're seeing storytelling, not history. This teaches critical skill. Trace the provenance backward. Where does claim first appear? Literary fiction, museum display, or actual court document? Myth hash 7. Flute of Shame. Described as iron device restraining musicians' fingers as punishment. Atlas Obscura names it as example in torture museum, packed with artifacts of dubious origin, labels failing to pin down time, place, real use. Specificity can be built on purpose. Vivid name plus believable target group creates instant trust. The survival lesson. When device lives mostly in modern museum rooms built to spice tourist sites, it works as stage prop, not documented standard. The thematic consistency, medieval people were cruel and petty, is designed to satisfy modern moral scripts rather than represent historical reality. Myth hash height. Brazen Bull. History.com describes this as ancient mythical device tied to Phalaris of Sicily, 6th century BCE. Hollow bronze bull. Fire beneath. Screams turning to bull noises. Then undercuts entire story. Main source Diodorus Siculus writes to 500 years after events, tale, likely, myth, or heavy decoration. Medieval Europe later repeated ancient horror stories. Modern audiences file them under medieval torture because mood matches expectations. The survival lesson. Stories can be famous, echoed by later writers, and still function as warning myths rather than documented practices. Completeness keeps it alive. Villain, machine, crowd, sound, fire. That cinematic perfection signals storytelling, not archival fact. Myth #9. Iron Maiden. History.com retells story through Polybius. Spartan ruler Nabis allegedly uses robot-like figure resembling wife to force payment, crushing victims with hidden hooks. Then key turn. Scholars suggest Polybius may be writing allegory instead of literal hardware. Ancient sources often aim to persuade, warn, mock, not list engineering specs. The survival lesson. Myths love machines that behave like moral judgment. When story reads like parable about tyranny, it may function as one. Source criticism asks, who writes it? How far from events? What motive colors scene? Myth Hasson 0. Blood Eagle. Britannica describes as ritual execution in Norse literature, ribs separated from spine, tissue spread forming wings. Key word, literature. Smithsonian explains dispute. Vikings left no written records of own deeds. Sagas written centuries later, researchers argue over whether Blood Eagle is literal practice, poetic metaphor, or later exaggeration. 2022 anatomy paper models procedures feasibility. Physically possible, but feasibility isn't proof of routine use. Kiel University stresses, no archaeological evidence confirms ritual. Medieval descriptions arrive late, filtered through Christian writers with reasons to paint enemies barbaric. The survival lesson. Blood Eagle sits in myth-fact border zone, where modern hunger for extremes keeps it glowing. Feasible is not equal to proven. This distinction protects you from accepting claims just because they're physically possible. Now we pivot to documented realities. These devices have paper trails, court records, legal inventories, survivor testimony, archaeological evidence. Number 1. The Rack. This appears in actual Tower of London records. Historic royal palaces documents its use during religious upheavals, suspicion, interrogations aimed at exposing conspiracies. The machine offered shortcut. Pain now, names now, order restored by force. Royal Armories holds physical examples. The rack threatens slow dislocation visible, measurable, documented in legal proceedings and survivor accounts. The survival lesson. Real torture leaves bureaucratic evidence, court authorizations, tool inventories, survivor testimony, payment records for construction, maintenance. When evaluating historical claims, this documentation gap distinguishes real from fabricated. The rack exists in archives, not just museums. Number 2. Scavenger's Daughter. History.com describes this at Tower of London. 16th, 17th centuries metal frame compressing victim, opposite of rack. Reports note compression causes bleeding from nose, mouth, elsewhere. Can kill. Historic royal palaces places it in same political storm as rack religious upheaval interrogations. Royal Armories holds iron restraint tied to this, linking object to Tudor-era tower through Leonard Skeffington's name. The survival lesson. Design logic reveals purpose. Rack threatens slow dislocation. Scavenger's Daughter threatens fast pressure. Blood. Collapse. Built for speed. Understanding torture engineering helps you recognize when systems are optimized for specific outcomes. Quick confession versus prolonged example making versus public spectacle. Different goals require different tools. Number 3. Thumbscrews. History.com identifies as early modern European device circa 1450 to 1750. Crushing fingers, thumbs, often a step before worse methods. Science Museum Group describes mechanics. Screw tightens against thumb held in place to force information or confession. Simple mechanics explain spread. Metalwork plus leverage equals control. Here's what's chilling. Portability.